Hi everyone, it's me, Tim. I'm frequently asked, why is it so big? And I'm like, excuse me? Let me back up. I'm frequently asked, why are modern games so much bigger than older games? This comes up a lot on the channel, and I've answered it many times down in the comments. So I decided to finally make a video about it and talk about it in excruciating detail so that I can just point to people at this video and go, this is why. If you're here for the short answer, why are modern games so big? I've got it for you. Art. Tap out now. We're done. That's pretty much the whole answer. If you want some nuance to it, if you want some detail in art, and also that other things have gotten bigger, just not as big as art, then that's what I'm going to talk about for the rest of the video. So let's dive into it. Let's start with art, which is the biggest contributor to why the file sizes on a game that you buy, either physically or digitally, is so big. Let's start with resolution. The resolution for older games used to be tiny. They were like, 160 by 120 back in the EGA and CGA era. By the time we got to VGA, it was 320 by 200 or sometimes 320 by 240. Crazy. And a lot of people were like, that's good enough. Then we got 640, 480, which was considered super VGA. And for a long time, people were like, isn't that big enough? But monitors got bigger. People started playing on consoles attached to very huge TVs. So we went high def. Then we went 2K. Then we went 4K. Each one of those roughly doubled the size of the screen. They didn't double the size of both dimensions. For example, 1920 by 1080, 24-bit, that's about 6 meg of data, because remember you have to have 3 bytes to do the 24-bit. 2K is 2560 by 1440, which is 12 meg. And then 4K is often considered to be 3840 by 2160, which is 24 megs of pixel data. That's a lot of pixel data. And you may be thinking, well, what does that size have to do with anything? Well, let me start with textures. Every object you see in a 3D game is textured. Those textures have to get higher resolution to still look good on higher resolution screens. So as our screens got bigger, our textures got bigger. And remember, they doubled in size every time that we went up a stage. So now we're at 4K, which is 24 meg of data, which means you need much bigger textures to look good. Similarly, models to look good at that resolution usually have more polygons in them. And that means that when you are making models, you have to have a denser mesh, which is bigger to store. And then all of those polygons in that mesh, or usually it's triangles, those get rendered to your screen with those higher resolution textures, which also have to be stored. But wait, it's even more complicated than that, because a lot of optimization techniques require storing multiple versions of both textures and models to use at different distances. It's a level of detail thing. So when you look at something far away, maybe they can use a model that has less polygons in it, and they can use lower resolution textures. And then when you get closer, they switch to the other ones. That way they don't have to downsample the textures when they're far away, or the models, which takes time, which reduces performance, which goes into frame rate, which I'm about to talk about in just a second. So just so you know, so that means you may be storing a 4K and a 2K and an HD texture size and model mesh density, so that you can do level of detail and distance drawing efficiently and effectively. But that gets into frame rate. It used to be that if you hit 30 frames a second in a game, you were considered good enough. Then it was 60 frames per second. Now it's 120, and 240 is looming on the horizon, because people are like, well, in competitive esports, you need 240 frames per second so you can get that millisecond difference between the two competitors and their inputs. Yes. But keep in mind that the animations of the models you're going to do are dependent on the frame rate. A higher frame rate means more complex, denser set of animations, so things look good when they move at that high frame rate, and you don't have to interpolate between frames. That's more data being stored too. Guess what? All this combines when we're talking about video because there's so much more video associated with modern games than in older games. Older games often didn't have any video, or if they did, they had what was called the opening cinematic, and then that's all you got. The rest of it was all game. Modern games have tons of cutscenes, multiple maybe opening cinematics, maybe one when you just before you get to the main menu, it's showing video for the what would have been a splash screen for the game's logo. It's now a video, like lasers shooting around and the logo comes spinning out. So there's so much more video in modern games, and those videos are at higher resolution and higher frame rate, and you guessed it, those take a lot more storage space to put on your disc or digital download. By the way, I hadn't even touched upon lighting. As lighting got more complex in video games, you not only had to store lights on maps, but texture, in addition to textures, you had to store normal maps and diffusion maps and all kinds of things to make the lighting look better. Just to make skin look good, you have to do something called subsurface highlighting. I don't even know what it is. I'm not a graphics programmer. I just remember looking at something and going, what are all those extra maps you're storing? And it was to make things look good under different lighting conditions and to make certain things like skin look less plasticky and more like real skin. So, okay, that's like the basic art. That is like a piece of art in the game is way bigger now, way bigger. But wait, games are longer now. Back then, if you put out a 5 or 10 hour game, that was okay. Now people complain that it has to be at least 20, but 40 has become standard. People want a 40-hour game. And yeah, I do know there are people who want less lengthy games, and they talk about games respecting their time. But one of the first questions I'm ever asked is, how long is your game? People say they don't care, and then one of the first questions I got asked is, oh, your new RPG? How many hours is it? How many hours is the main storyline? Sometimes people want over 100 hours in that. And guess what? If you have games of that length, what comes hand in hand with that is people want more variety in all kinds of things. They want more maps, which then have to be stored. They want more environment variety, which means they're not going to be happy with every map just being grassland. They want some forests, and they want deserts and snow and mountains and coastlines and all that, which means all these new textures and props that have to be put in to those maps, which is a lot more art, and those art pieces are already individually bigger. But then they want more items. They want more weapons you can find and more armor you can wear and just other things that you can find and use. And they want it to look really good. They want it to look good in their user interface. They want it to look good on the ground. They want it to look good when they wield it. And often those are 3 different models. And those, you guessed it, are stored at a much bigger size on modern games. I haven't even talked about special effects. It used to be you might have, for a spell system, landing, you might have, here's a boom effect, here's some effect is going off on them, and then here's a little, projectile effect. Now people want a different effect for every spell, and they want those effects to be high resolution and have really good sound, which brings me into all the other things besides art that have gotten bigger. Sound is a big one. There's more music, more voiceover, more sound effects in modern games, and all of those are now stored at a much higher quality. We used to do not even 8-bit monophonic wave files that we compressed to beyond their breaking point so they'd fit on a floppy. Now people are putting in tracks of music and whole libraries of 100,000 voiceover lines and tons of special effects for all those different sound effects for all the different special effects you put in, and those are stored at high quality, often high bit levels and stereo, sometimes 5.1, so you have a center channel stored as well. That takes up more space. Code takes up more space, and you may wonder why. Well, bigger games with more features have more code, but also if you're incorporating libraries or using engines, often if you use one feature out of a library or one part of an engine, it brings in the whole chunk that uses that part, even though you're only using that one part. It doesn't get rid of the rest. Now, these aren't as big as art, but people always will go, well, you didn't talk about sound and code. There's that. One other thing that factors in here is compression. We used to compress a lot because we had to fit on floppies or on a CD. We often decompress during install, and that's why you often saw different installation options where you could say, keep it small on disk, and then you have a performance hit when you play the game. But often if you use one feature out of a library or one part of an engine, it brings in the whole chunk that incorporating libraries or using engines, often if you're incorporating libraries or using engines, it brings in the whole chunk that Or you could decompress to your hard drive and then you'd have a faster loading and all that. Well, modern games, people expect no or very fast load times. There's a modern trend to complain whenever there's a loading screen. And also, if you want to keep your frame rate high, you probably can't be decompressing everything that you're loading into memory when you're demand loading things. Like people go around a corner and there's a new texture on a wall, there's a tree, there's a monster, and you've got to load that really quickly. If you have to load and decompress while you're doing it, that may slow you down and drop your frame rate. So maybe you don't do the compression. Guess what? That leads to everything being bigger on disk. Now, yes, sound and code have gotten bigger, but the largest, by far, contributor to why modern games are bigger is art. And this is the video I'm going to point to the next time someone says, why are games so big?